Hello, welcome to my channel. This is Jaja Dore, and today I'm going to be telling the story about the game show Contestant. This is another one of my murder cases. I think this one is going to be quite a lengthy one. I have in front of me like 12 pages of notes that I've taken over the last 2 weeks. I'm also coming at you today not with natural face but with natural lioness hair. I know I look like Krusty the Clown, and this is actually not because I'm covering a case from the 70s, but just because I couldn't be asked to straighten my hair. Sometimes the scariest thing about someone...
It's time to meet our first three eligible bachelors for game number one, and here they are.
...is that they're not actually scary at all.
Rodney Alcala.
This clip is from 1978, where Rodney Alcala appeared on The Dating Game, which was a game show in the 70s that was really corny, similar to Blind Date, if you remember that, with Cilla Black, where contestants would compete to win over the heart of a lady without using their looks and purely with flirtatious answers. If you watch other clips from this game show, it's actually really sexist and very 70s and out of date, but actually it was really popular, similar to how Blind Date was really popular, where they'd even had celebrities. I think Farrah Fawcett went on the show.
We're delighted to welcome to The Dating Game, Farrah Fawcett. Hello, Farrah. How are you?
It was really well known. Rodney Alcala was actually born Rodriguez Alcala Bucor. He was born on the 23rd of August 1943, and he was born in San Antonio, Texas. He had two sisters, one brother, and in 1951 the family moved to Mexico. 3 years later, when Rodney was 11 years old, his father actually abandoned him, and the mother moved Rodney and his siblings to Los Angeles, California. At 17 years old, Rodney joined the army, but he was dismissed soon after because of mental illness, so he was thought at this point to have had a borderline personality disorder. He also showed signs of psychopathy as well as sexual sadism. Later, after he was disbanded from the army, graduated from UCLA with a degree in fine arts. So there was an interview that I watched with his ex-girlfriend, Beth Keller, and she is describing him as this really gentle, really sexy young guy.
There was no difference in personality, no difference in the things we did, the things we talked about.
It's really scary to think that at the time that she was dating him, he was actually really not that. So in the summer of 1968, 8-year-old Tali Shapiro was making her way to school in Hollywood. A beige car without number plates pulls up next to her with a man in the car that beckoned her to go and take a ride with him. Being 8 years old, she responded in the normal way, which I'm sure most 8-year-olds would respond with, and said that she was not allowed to speak to strangers. The man in the car then explained that he was a friend of her parents, and being any other 8-year-old little girl, she trusted him and got into the car. I remember being at that age, and it's, as much as you know that you're not supposed to talk to strangers, you're really young and you trust adults because they're supposed to be your superior. And yeah, she got in the car. She got in the car, he explained that he wanted to show her a picture and drove her back to his apartment. So someone sees that this beige car has pulled up beside this young girl and it doesn't have number plates. He just feels that there's something suspicious, so he calls 911, to which he and the police follow the car. Police arrive at the scene to an apartment. They knock on the door and a man inside explains that he can't come to the door because he's in the shower. So there's back and forth between the two. The police decide to kick the door down. 8-year-old Tali Shapiro was found in a pool of her blood on the kitchen floor, with a metal bar next to her which she'd clearly been beaten to an inch of her life with. Tests later show that Tali was also sexually assaulted. At the scene, the police determined her as dead. The man that took Tali to his house was not found, but police later found a mass amount of photos in the house of young girls taken by someone and pictures of the person in the photos with them. Tali Shapiro actually survived, and she's now 58 years old. She has a son and she works as a chef. And the man found in those photos was none other than Rodney Alcala. So Rodney Alcala was not found at the scene. They didn't know where he had gone. The police couldn't seem to track him down. I think to remember at this point that this was 1968. There wasn't technology like there is nowadays, and it wasn't as easy to track people down as where it might have been now. So in 1971, in a summer camp in New Hampshire, I don't know if many of you know America too well, but New Hampshire is about 280 miles away from New York. It's its own separate state. Two campers on a summer campsite spotted an FBI poster with pictures on the FBI poster of Most Wanted, and they looked at this poster and they saw an uncanny likeness to their camp counsellor, who was named John Berger. So the two campers decided to report this person that looked freakishly like their camp counsellor. John Berger, after being reported, was taken into police custody and questioned, to only later uncover that he was in fact Rodney Alcala and posing as a camp counsellor with a group of children in a summer camp. After the Tali Shapiro incident, it was seen that Rodney Alcala actually initially fled to New York, where he enrolled in an NYC university to study art under the name John Berger, and posed as a children's counsellor to get money during the summer in a summer camp. After being arrested and found to actually be Rodney Alcala, he was then extradited back to California to stand trial. Tali's parents at this point just wanted Tali to live a normal life after living through such a horrendous experience, so they decided to move Tali and the rest of the family to Mexico for a better life. They didn't want to put their daughter through any further stress, so they decided not to involve Tali in court and not to press charges. Because of this, the courts were forced to give Rodney a lesser charge, and instead he went down for 34 months just for assault. Rodney was sentenced for 34 months, but after demonstrating signs of rehabilitation, he was actually allowed out on parole after 17 months. So less than 2 months after Rodney was released on parole, he was actually rearrested for supplying cannabis to a 13-year-old girl who, there's very limited information on this girl. She likes to remain, or she would prefer to remain, anonymous. Her name is Julie J, for the sake of the court. She claims to have been abducted and given cannabis, although similar to before, she did not want to press further charges. Rodney was only sentenced for a further 2 years. Just after Rodney's second release, he was allowed by his parole offer to travel to New York, which to me seems mental. I had to stop myself from swearing then. Knowing his history now twice, they let him travel to New York, even though they knew that he was a flight risk and that he's run away before. So we're going to now focus on his first convicted murders. So the first was Jill Barcombe. Jill was a beautiful 18-year-old high school student from New York. She was described as absolutely tiny and petite. She was also described as funny with a really wild side, and she had planned to move to LA from New York on her own as soon as she was old enough. Jill's remains were found on November the 10th, 1977, near the Hollywood sign in LA, on Franklin Canyon Drive. Due to the levels of decomposition, it's thought that Jill was murdered 3 weeks before. Jill was found naked from the waist down. She had her knees to her chest and her face in the dirt. It's thought that she was initially hit in the face with a rock and then strangled to death with a pair of blue trousers. It was also seen that she was severely beaten and sexually assaulted quite brutally, and she had deep bite marks in her right breast. The next convicted murder of Rodney Alcala was Georgia Wickstead. Georgia was a 27-year-old registered nurse, and she lived in the Malibu area in California. There's such little information on Georgia, and I don't know if that's because that's maybe how her family would prefer to keep it, or just because this was in the 70s and at this point nothing was put online, so it's all new information that's being put online. But I couldn't find out much more about her. I can see from pictures of her that she literally looks like a 70s film star. She's got beautiful blonde hair and massive eyes, and she looks like she should be a film star. Georgia's body was found on the 16th of December 1977 in her Malibu apartment. Georgia was found naked. She had been sexually assaulted and bludgeoned with a hammer before being strangled with a pair of tights. So in the next year is where Rodney Alcala actually appeared on The Dating Game and won, and this was in 1978. He appeared as Rodney Alcala, nor his other names that he's known as, which is John Berger, John Berger, Rodriguez Alcala or Rodney Alcala. The time that he appeared on The Dating Game, he had already killed at least 2 women. Although that wasn't known, but he did go on live TV and he was known for what happened to Tali Shapiro. He was also known for, at this time, giving cannabis to a 13-year-old girl and potentially abducting her, and he spent time in prison for it. And then he'd also, at a separate occasion, been arrested and jailed for possession of drugs. Not someone that I can imagine nowadays would get on TV.
A bachelor number 1. Serving you for dinner.
Oh.
What are you called, and what do you look like?
I'm called the banana, and I look really good.
Can you be a little more descriptive?
Peel me.
He actually won a date with Bachelorette Cheryl Bradshaw.
Congratulations, Rod, you did it with the one answer.
Although later Cheryl refused to go on a date with him, even though they had won, because she described him as odd and creepy. One of the other contestants on the show that was sitting really near him throughout this filming actually said that he was a really bizarre man with very, very odd opinions. So the next victim to be found was Charlotte Lamb. Charlotte Lamb was a legal secretary from Santa Monica. She was 32 years old. She was very angelic looking, and her sister described her as someone that is super, super creative. She liked to paint and she liked to make her own clothes and skirts and dresses. Charlotte's body was found on June the 24th, 1978, 2 days before her 33rd birthday. She was found in a laundry room which was in the basement of an apartment block that she didn't actually live in. She was found by the apartment block manager. The apartment manager found her naked, lying on her back with her hands bound behind her, again being sexually assaulted and then strangled, but this time with a shoelace. The next victim to be found was Jill Parento. Jill was a 21-year-old computer program key punch operator from Burbank, California. Jill was brutally murdered on June 14th, 1979, almost just about a year after Charlotte Lamb was found. Rodney Alcala actually broke into her apartment through a window. He raped Jill and then strangled her using a nylon cord. So the next victim was Robin Samso. Robin was thought to be the final victim of Rodney Alcala. Robin Samso was a 12-year-old little girl from Orange County, California. She loved spending time with her family, and her passion at this point in her life was ballet dancing. On June 20th, 1979, Robin and her friend Bridget were walking along Huntington Beach when they were approached by Rodney Alcala. Rodney, the same as what he had done multiple times before, had posed as a fashion photographer and asked the girls to pose for him while he took pictures of them. And just an in note, I found it really bizarre that this actually happened on June 20th, 1979, when the Bain case, which I covered in one of my last videos, also happened on June 20th, but in 1994. Just thought that was a really odd, didn't plan that connection, but odd that they both on the same day. So Alcala was taking pictures of Bridget and Robin on the beach, and a neighbour of Bridget's saw the girls having their photos taken by a man that she didn't recognise and called over to ask if they were okay. On calling over to ask if the girls were okay, Rodney actually fled the scene instantly and ran away, which the neighbour thought was really bizarre but didn't think much of it at the time. Later that day, Robin got on her bike and made her way to her ballet classes, which she never returned from. 12 days later, Robin's skeletal remains were found in the hills of LA. Because of where her body was and the time of year, it was very little evidence at the scene. Her body had been scavenged by animals and the level of decomposition was quite severe. It was, however, determined that her cause of death, again similar to the other cases, was strangulation. It was seen that her front teeth were missing and thought to be knocked out by Rodney Alcala. So until this point, police were always 1 or 2 steps behind Rodney, though they knew of him and knew that he was what he was capable of because of what he did to Tali Shapiro years before. It was known that Rodney Alcala had a storage locker in Seattle, and police decided to go and investigate that storage locker to see what was inside. Inside the storage locker was many items, lots and lots of photos of young girls and boys, and a bag of jewellery. Found inside the bag of jewellery was lots of pairs of earrings which Rodney claimed to be his own. So also found in the jewellery bag was a pair of stud earrings which were later discovered to belong to Robin Samso, and they were identified by her mother. Alcala was originally arrested for Samso's murder in 1980, where he was sentenced to death, but later the conviction was overturned. This then happened for a second time in 1986, where yet again he was charged and sentenced to death, but then yet again later got overturned. So during this time, as you can imagine, technology is becoming more and more advanced, and the DNA was tested on the earrings as well as tested from the scenes of the crimes of the other victims. So Alcala's third trial was during the course of 2010, and as you can imagine, by this time technology is far more advanced, and DNA was taken from multiple crime scenes, being as these victims were sexually assaulted. Also, blood of Rodney Alcala was found in Jill Parento's apartment from when he climbed through the window and cut his arm. The DNA was also tested on the earrings to match multiple victims, including Robin Samso, Jill Parento, Charlotte Lamb, Georgia Wickstead, and Jill Barcombe. On Rodney Alcala's third trial, he actually decided to represent himself. This to me shows how cocky and arrogant he was by this stage. He'd already been sentenced to death twice and he'd already been overturned twice, so I wonder if at this point he felt really cocky and arrogant and thought that he could even get away with representing himself. He even called himself to stand and testify and questioned himself in the third person, changing his voice whether he was pretending to be his own lawyer or himself as Rodney Alcala. He then tried to sway the jury by playing the song Alice's Restaurant in his closing statement. And if you listen to the lyrics of this song, it's actually quite unsettling.
I want to kill. I want to see blood and gore and guts and veins in my teeth. Eat death.
And this was really just the nail in the coffin for his final sentencing. On the 25th of February 2010, Rodney Alcala was found guilty of 5 counts of murder, 4 counts of rape, and 1 count of abduction, and he was sentenced to death for the third and final time. Rodney was charged with the murders of Robin Samso, Jill Parento, Charlotte Lamb, Georgia Wickstead, and Jill Barcombe. Rodney Alcala is also suspected of killing 2 other known victims as well as multiple others, one being Helen Hoover. Helen Hoover was a 23-year-old student who was quite well known in the area. She lived in New York, and she actually went missing a week after Rodney Alcala was allowed to travel to New York after his release for providing marijuana to a 13-year-old girl. Helen was absolutely beautiful. Her father owned a chain of really famous nightclubs across America called Chiro's. She was actually the goddaughter of Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin. Helen Hoover's remains were found buried in the grounds of Rockefeller Estate in Winchester County. The reason why it's thought that Rodney Alcala committed this murder is actually because she had told her friend that she'd agreed to go on a lunch date with a photographer called John. Another victim that is thought to be of Rodney Alcala is 23-year-old Cornelia Criley. She was a flight attendant and she was found dead and raped and strangled in New York in 1971 in her apartment. Rodney Alcala has actually been incarcerated since 1979, and he is still alive to this day and remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison in California. And that's it. That is the story of the game show Contestant. It's part of the reason why I'm so interested in murder cases and serial killers, is because they're not how you think they'd be. I think as a kid, you know, you've got this image in your head of Freddy Krueger and Hannibal Lecter and these terrifying people that you should be wary of, whereas you should actually be wary of who's sitting next to you and not be so naive with people. So that is today's story. Please do not forget to like and subscribe. I will have more coming to you soon, though they take an absolute lifetime to research. I will be having more to you soon, as well as some more light-hearted videos. Give me a like, give me a subscription, and I will see you soon.